I learned that song like 2 days before I performed it live. Oh my gosh, and I about puked every time I performed on the show. It was just...
In the quiet suburbs of Oklahoma, long before the flashing lights and standing ovations, Darci Lynne wasn't the star the world would later see. She was a painfully shy little girl who could barely raise her voice in public. Her parents say she'd often hide behind furniture during family gatherings, too timid to even say hello. But something changed when she discovered puppets. These weren't just toys. They became her voice, her armor, her escape. While other kids played dress-up or sports, Darci locked herself in her room, speaking through characters that allowed her to express emotions she didn't dare speak aloud. Family videos from those years show a child with an infectious smile, yet eyes that often drifted away from the camera, as if wrestling with unspoken fears. Her parents admitted they were concerned. Was she just shy, or was something deeper going on? Friends noticed it too. Darci was the sweet girl who never spoke unless you handed her a puppet. It wasn't just stage fright, it was a complex, internal battle with social anxiety, cloaked in a child's play. Even at local pageants, she would freeze backstage, her small hands trembling until her puppet was in place. The moment it was, a transformation occurred, as if a switch flipped and the girl disappeared, replaced by a bold, funny character. But beneath the surface, the truth was clear. Darci didn't feel safe being herself. She was building a world where she could speak only when pretending to be someone else. And as her talent grew, so did the pressure to stay in character, to hide behind the ventriloquist act that the world adored. This quiet emotional conflict followed her as she stepped closer to the national spotlight. And what happened next would push that pressure to a level no child should ever face. When Darci Lynne stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage in 2017, she looked like any sweet, small-town girl, nervous, wide-eyed, barely 13. But within seconds of performing, the audience erupted. With her puppet Petunia in hand and a flawless operatic voice coming from what seemed like nowhere, she wasn't just good, she was unforgettable. Judge Mel slammed the golden buzzer, showering her in confetti, and overnight, Darci became a viral phenomenon. Millions watched her audition on YouTube, and media outlets hailed her as a child prodigy. But behind the curtain, something else was unfolding. Darci would later admit that she was often so terrified before performances that she felt like throwing up. The glitz and glamour masked a young girl battling intense performance anxiety. Each standing ovation came with a crushing weight, the expectation to be perfect, funny, composed, every single time. Friends and family recall her breaking down backstage, trembling before live shows, and clinging to her puppet like it was a life preserver. She didn't just fear forgetting her lines, she feared losing control in front of millions. The pressure wasn't only external. Darci placed enormous expectations on herself, believing that anything less than perfection would disappoint her growing fan base. As she advanced through the rounds, the stakes grew higher, and the stress more unbearable. And yet, no one watching at home could tell. To them, she was a fearless young star, smiling through every moment. But inside, she was unraveling, bottling up anxiety that was too big for a child to carry. And after she won the entire season, the world assumed her story was a fairy tale. But winning wasn't the ending. It was just the beginning of a storm she never saw coming. Winning America's Got Talent should have been a dream come true, but for Darci Lynne, it quickly turned into a non-stop whirlwind that tested the limits of her body and mind. Within weeks of her AGT victory, Darci was swept into a national press tour, appearing on talk shows, red carpets, and high-profile events that most seasoned adults would struggle to manage. At just 13, she was expected to maintain a smile, deliver flawless performances, and answer questions with charm and wit, all while juggling schoolwork and growing pains. By the time she launched her first national tour, her schedule was booked solid for months. Theaters, arenas, meet and greets, TV specials. On the surface, she was a sensation, sold-out shows, screaming fans, glowing headlines. But behind the scenes, exhaustion was creeping in. Family insiders later admitted that Darci was often drained after performances, sometimes needing to retreat backstage mid-tour just to cry or collect herself. The high-energy routines, the constant travel, the relentless media obligations, it all started taking a toll. Her close friends noticed she began isolating herself more, pulling back from social activities, and even questioning if this was the path she truly wanted. She was a teenager who had never really been given a chance to grow up quietly, without cameras tracking her every move. And while the world saw a polished performer, her family saw the warning signs of burnout, emotional outbursts, chronic fatigue, and moments of detachment that didn't match her usual bubbly personality. Darci had become a brand before she even finished middle school, and the weight of maintaining that image began to crush the joy out of her craft. The puppets, once her source of comfort, were now instruments of pressure. And as her schedule intensified, one thing became inevitable. Something had to give, and when it did, the silence would be deafening. As the spotlight continued to blaze, something unusual began to happen. Darci Lynne, the ever-present star, started fading quietly from the public eye. Fans who once saw her everywhere began to notice gaps. Fewer performances, sporadic uploads, canceled appearances. Whispers swirled online. Was she sick? Was she stepping away? But the truth was far more delicate and rarely spoken aloud. Darci was silently battling a deep emotional fatigue, the kind that doesn't show up in headlines or Instagram posts. Around age 14, while most teens were just figuring themselves out, Darci had already lived a life under pressure few could comprehend. The joy she once found in puppetry had dulled, replaced by anxiety, self-doubt, and a growing fear of letting people down. Interviews became less frequent, and when they did happen, her energy seemed restrained, her words more guarded. In one revealing moment, she subtly admitted that the fame was a lot to handle, and that she had to find balance again. Behind that soft phrasing was a storm of emotional exhaustion. Her family reportedly grew concerned as she became more withdrawn, spending less time rehearsing, more time alone. The puppets, once her safe haven, now sat untouched, symbols of an identity she wasn't sure she could carry anymore. Darci never issued a formal statement about her struggles, but her silence spoke volumes. Mental health professionals later pointed to her case as a cautionary tale of what happens when child fame is packaged as a fairy tale. The pressure to smile, perform, and be okay had buried her real emotions for too long. And by the time she finally pulled back, she wasn't just taking a break from the stage. She was trying to rediscover the girl behind the puppet. But even away from the cameras, healing wasn't instant. And as fans waited for a comeback, few realized just how much she was still fighting, quietly and alone. For someone who once lit up stages across the country, Darci Lynne's sudden quiet felt jarring to longtime fans. By 2020, her social media presence had noticeably slowed. The once regular posts turned into occasional updates, most of them polished and minimal, offering little insight into her emotional state. But behind the scenes, Darci was deep in recovery, trying to understand who she was when the cameras weren't rolling. Those close to her described this period as a necessary retreat, a time when she deliberately stepped away from the noise to rebuild her mental and emotional foundation. She didn't vanish completely, but what little she did share was carefully curated. A photo here, a brief appearance there, often with captions hinting at reflection, growth, and needing space. In rare interviews, she opened up ever so slightly, stating she was learning how to be a normal teenager again. But normalcy was elusive for a girl who had never known life without scrutiny. Sources say she spent more time at home, leaned on family, and even considered walking away from performing altogether. During this pause, Darci grappled with identity. Was she still the ventriloquist prodigy, or something entirely different? The stage had once defined her, but now in silence, she searched for a voice that didn't belong to a puppet. Friends mentioned she began journaling, attending therapy, and slowly reclaiming joy in the everyday things she'd missed. Sleepovers, hobbies, even just breathing without an audience. She posted lighthearted TikToks now and then, but fans could sense the change. Behind the filters was someone softer, more cautious, perhaps more guarded. And while the world moved on to newer viral stars, Darci's story was far from over. Because in the quiet, something was shifting. She wasn't just recovering. She was evolving. And what came next would show a a very different version of the girl the world thought they knew. When Darci Lynne finally began to re-emerge, it wasn't with the grand spectacle fans might have expected. There was no dramatic TV comeback, no flashy Vegas residency, no viral puppet stunt. Instead, what surfaced was something far more powerful. A young woman slowly, intentionally redefining herself on her own terms. Her return was subtle, yet telling. New Instagram posts that leaned less on performance and more on personal moments, snippets of original songs rather than puppet-led comedy, and honest captions that hinted at growth, vulnerability, and self-discovery. The bubbly teenager America had once embraced was now an introspective, creative soul navigating life after childhood fame. In interviews, she began to speak more openly, not dramatically, but truthfully, about the emotional toll of her early stardom. She admitted that while she was grateful for the platform AGT gave her, she had to unlearn the habit of always performing, of always pleasing. Her priorities shifted, less about audience approval, more about self-expression and mental wellness. Music, not puppetry, became her new passion. She started writing and releasing original songs that explored heartbreak, anxiety, and personal strength. Fans were stunned. This wasn't the ventriloquist they remembered. This was an artist emerging from years of silence, with something real to say. She even spoke out on mental health platforms, quietly advocating for teens dealing with anxiety and burnout. It was never packaged as a comeback. It was a quiet evolution, a reclaiming of identity that didn't require applause. Her voice was no longer coming through a puppet. It was hers, raw and direct. And though she hadn't fully returned to the mainstream spotlight, those who followed her closely could see it. Darci wasn't trying to be the same girl who won AGT. She was building something new, something stronger. But even with her reinvention underway, one question still lingered. Was the world ready to accept the new Darci Lynne? Today, Darci Lynne stands as a quiet survivor of an industry that rarely shows mercy to child stars. No longer the puppet-wielding prodigy paraded across late-night shows. She stepped into young adulthood with a grounded, self-aware presence that few in her position ever achieve. While she hasn't completely abandoned ventriloquism, it's no longer the centerpiece of her identity. Instead, Darci has shifted focus to original music, creative exploration, and living life beyond the stage. Her recent projects hint at a more introspective artist, writing songs that reveal raw emotion, filming personal vlogs, and engaging in low-key but meaningful collaborations. She occasionally performs, but on her terms, in smaller, more intentional venues that allow space for authenticity over spectacle. Friends say she's still healing, still navigating the aftershocks of early fame, but now with better tools and firmer boundaries. She's spoken publicly, though never sensationally, about the importance of mental health, the dangers of burnout, and the pressure of being perfect in front of millions. Her fans, many of whom grew up with her, have noticed the difference. She's softer, more reflective, less polished in a way that feels more real. She's also become a voice of empathy for other young creators, subtly mentoring from the sidelines through honesty and transparency rather than fame. Darci's journey isn't one of disappearance. It's a quiet redefinition shaped by pain, resilience, and deep personal growth. And while she may never fully return to the explosive stardom of her AGT days, she's found something even more valuable: peace, purpose, and the freedom to be herself. Her story isn't tragic because she failed. It's heartbreaking because the world almost broke someone so gifted. But against the odds, Darci Lynne found a way to reclaim her voice. And in doing so, she's writing a new chapter. One scarred, but stronger than ever. Darci Lynne's story is often remembered as a feel-good fairy tale. A shy girl with a puppet who stole America's heart and walked away with $1 million prize. But beneath that glittering surface lies a far more sobering reality, one that many never saw coming. Her journey was never just about talent. It was about the emotional cost of being extraordinary in a world that demands perfection from children who haven't even learned who they are yet. Darci didn't vanish because she lacked ability. She stepped back because she had to choose between survival and performance. And in doing so, she revealed a truth few child stars ever get the chance to share: that healing, self-discovery, and saying no are sometimes the bravest acts of all. Today, she may not dominate headlines or trend overnight, but that's never been the goal. What she's built instead is something far more enduring, a life of intention, balance, and creative freedom. She has shown that even after fame has faded and the applause is quieted, there's a path forward rooted in authenticity. Darci Lynne may no longer be the girl behind the puppet, but in her silence, her scars, and her strength, she's become something much greater. A quiet reminder that behind every spotlight, there's a story worth listening to. If her journey moved you, take a moment to reflect on the countless others who smile through pain just to meet our expectations. And if you'd like to hear more untold stories like Darci's, don't forget to like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. Because the truth, as we've seen, is often more powerful than the performance.